Thank you, Jeannie. Good evening, fellow Toastmasters. And next Monday is Earth Day. Earth Day reminds us that we have a responsibility to be good stewards of the earth that sustains us. Over the last 40 years, it's been ingrained into our society that our efforts can make a difference. In every school, in every part of our country, every child is taught, reduce, reuse, recycle. It's part of the curriculum, and it's become somewhat of a moral imperative. Since the 90s, there's been a big effort towards recycling. State and local governments set goals to reduce the amount of solid waste that enters our landfills, and they issue mandates requiring that new packaging contain recycled content. Here in California, for example, 25% of the content of rigid plastic containers must be from recycled plastics. Paper is biodegradable and it's easy to recycle. Aluminum is also easy to recycle and can be recycled over and over again. Same thing with glass. And with some containers, there's a redemption value charged at purchase that can be redeemed. So those things are worth something. They have inherent value. What's harder to recycle is not biodegradable and is not cost-effective to reclaim is plastic. For the economically developed world, labor to sort, clean, and process, or the machines to do that, make recycling our plastics relatively costly. That's why so much of our recycling is sent to China. Around 2000, China joined the World Trade Organization. They started shipping goods all over the world. Rather than sending the containers back to China empty, it became cost-effective to fill them with recycling. Because of this, it became cheaper to send recycling to China than anywhere else in the world. Cities were able to subsidize their recycling programs by selling their recyclables to scrap brokers in China, while also not having to pay for the cost of recycling. About 45% of the world's plastics were being shipped to China, at least until last year. Last year, there was a big shakeup in the recycling world. China somewhat abruptly decided that they were going to change their policy on importation of recyclable materials. One reason is that China's been getting a lot of criticism from the rest of the world because of the pollution of the air and the water. You may have heard about those big patches of plastic floating out in the Pacific Ocean. 90% of that plastic comes from 10 rivers in Asia, and 6 of the rivers flow through China. Out of the top 20 plastic polluters in the world, China tops the list. And this is partly because scrap plastic recycling had become a popular cottage industry in China. If you could afford the equivalent of about $300, you could buy a plastic shredder, some tubs, some screens, and some chemicals and start your own plastics scrap recycling business. By 2006, there were 60,000 of these small family-owned workshops that were devoted to recycling the plastics that the larger factories didn't want. In these small businesses, there are no worker safety standards. And the chemicals used in cleaning eventually just get dumped into a hole in the ground, or worse, thrown into the creeks. And the plastics that are not recycled are burned or discarded. And the discarded plastics get into the rivers from open dumps, and from there out into the ocean. This has been happening for about 20 years now. 70% of the plastic that is being mishandled this way is coming from outside of China. So it stands to reason that what we think is happening to our plastic recycling is not what is happening. Since it's more cost-effective for a manufacturer to create new materials, new plastic packaging from new raw materials, the market for recycled plastics exists because of government mandates. But the governments have not come up with any efficient, cost-effective way to process these plastics. It's all out of sight, out of mind. To me, this is the ultimate not in my backyard. Our state government in California prides itself on being the leader in environmental standards. We're always patting ourselves on the back for that. Currently in California, we have a policy to have 75% of all of our solid waste recycled by 2020. But we have no way to process anywhere near that amount of our solid waste. So we'll just ship it off somewhere. Last year, China decided they finally had to do something about this mess and tell the rest of the world to deal with their own garbage. China called their new policy National Sword. I think there's probably some symbolic meaning there. It could potentially lead to the banning of all incoming recycling by 2020. This is the right thing to do for the Chinese environment, but it's having the unintended consequence of these small recycling factories popping up and operating in other Asian countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia. We can only surmise that the same problem is going to continue there unless there's no way for the people to make money from it. The whole recycling movement is supposed to be about conserving resources and not polluting. Good intentions aside, when you use government mandates to create an industry that has no market outside of fulfilling a government mandate, it disrupts things. It perpetuates a flawed cycle. It puts off having to create innovative solutions to a problem. Reduce, reuse, recycle. It kind of says it right there. Recycle should be the last resort. Reducing the amount of plastics we use or creating better biodegradable packaging should be first. We're going to have to accept the facts. Recycling plastics for the sake of recycling plastics has not helped Mother Earth. Madam Toastmaster?
Please let us take 2 minutes to evaluate Patty's speech. One more minute.